but welcome all. I will start with a short presentation of our guest this evening, Mikhail Sjisjkin. Mikhail is a child of the 60s, grew up in Moscow, worked in various fields, but ended up as a teacher of English and German in the unruly 90s. He has lived in Zurich since 1995, but continued to write in his native Russian, and is today one of the most internationally known and respected authors from Russia. He has 3 books of fiction published in Sweden: Venushår, Erövringen av Ismail och Brevboken, all recommended. Today's subject, however, is different and relates to his 4th book, Krig eller fred. This book was originally published in 2019 in German. The Swedish version that came last autumn has 3 addendums: Futurum 1, which is very pessimistic, and Futurum 2, slightly less pessimistic, and last, a letter to Europe, which I guess he hopes will be responsibly answered. The book is a natural result of him early, and from 2012 very public, distancing himself from the Putin regime. In it, he discusses how it was to grow up and live through the various stages of the Soviet Union and Russia, but which gives a deeper background, relates this to Russian history from the beginning and how it has shaped Russian mentality and concept, their understanding of the world. Today's program is that Mikhail will speak for, say, half an hour. After that, there is time for questions. You may write your question in the chat, and I will read them aloud. And it saves time if you write them in English. So, Mikhail Pavlovich, slovo za тобой.
Thank you very much for having invited me to this event. Happy to be with you. I'm happy to share with you my thoughts, my sorrow, my pain about what is happening now in the world, especially between Russia and Ukraine. And I would like to start with an essay where I try to express my feelings and my thoughts. My whole life, I felt I was standing on firm ground, and that firm ground was Russian culture. Now I'm standing on a void. Madame de Staël commented in passing, Le silence russe est tout à fait extraordinaire. Ce silence porte uniquement sur ceux qui leur inspirent un vif intérêt. The Russian silence is quite extraordinary. They are silent about precisely what inspires their vital interest. In the autumn of 2014, I flew to a book fair in Krasnoyarsk, an enormous celebration of literature. Everything looked just like in Frankfurt. And so it should in the 21st century. World culture makes itself at home in Siberia. That year, all the questions and discussions at my speeches in Europe were about the war. At the book fair in Russia, people talked about all kinds of things, just not the war. Everyone was terribly interested in the new guide to ancient Rome. Apparently, I was the only person who spoke on stage about this fresh disaster. This silence was humiliating. humiliating for everyone, writers and readers both. It was the final straw. I had no desire to return to that humiliation. Over the years of war, the silence became deafening, and after 24th February, unbearable. The avalanche of words never stops. Presentations of new guides to ancient Rome, literary festivals, issues of thick literary magazines that pretend everything's okay, courses on the theory and practice of creative writing, workshops for young writers on urgent topics such as how to construct a plot and conflict, heroes, and style. An avalanche of silence. An avalanche of silence in chorus. It's all one big master class on the Russian culture of silence. The talking out loud about other things is the silence with the back of the hand. Silence for salvation. Russian literature didn't save people from the Gulag, but it helped them survive in Gulag land. Turgenev and Chekhov as rescue rangers, and now they speed to the rescue once again. A quote on Facebook from a well-known author who speaks with readers at talks in Russia. The audience at the meetings is grateful, kind, and attentive. And something else. A year ago, any word or even peep about what was going on around us provoked stormy gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for speaking. Lately, it's been the exact opposite. Thank you for not speaking. Everyone already knows everything. We understand, and we are tired. The further away we can get from what surrounds us anyway, the better. Distraction and relaxation, if only for a short while. The end of quotation. Silence as a way to survive. Silence as an air to breathe. Time and historical circumstances alter our taste receptors. At one time in my youth, the Russian classics kept me from choking in the Soviet lies. The books on my shelf are the same. The rhymes never loosen their embrace, and the letters have not run off. But the words mean something completely different. They have a different taste now. I tried to reread my favorite Golden Age poets, and they are all stuffed with patriotic puke. We can't help but bear traces of the country in which we were raised. All of us who were born in Russia were born and grew up in the Moscow part of the Golden Horde, the Khanate of a 1,000-year empire, and even if we hate it, we breathe its air. And then we talk about Russia as imperial, and when we talk about Russia as imperial and colonial, it actually sounds like a compliment for this endless bloody swamp, since it puts our Moscow slave Khanate in the same category as the British Empire. We have to admit that a 21st century country is living by the law of the Golden Horde. At the top of the pyramid is the Khan, and below him are his slaves, who have no right of speech or property. And the sole meaning and ideology of this social order is power itself and the struggle for power. The essential and sufficient condition for the Khanate's existence is violence. A Khanate cannot be abolished by decree any more than language can. Over the course of generations, the prison reality produced prison behavior. The Russian proverb says, "Live with wolves, howl like wolves." This was expressed in the language that was called upon to serve Russian life, supporting it in a state of constant, unending war with the whole world and with itself. When everyone lives by prison rules, language concerns every person's war with every other person. If the strong must necessarily beat the weak, language's concern is to do so verbally. Humiliate, insult, withdraw rations, and degrade. Language as a form of disrespect for the individual. Language as a means for destroying human dignity. No single other empire has a verbal weapon like our more than just obscene mud language. It's difficult to explain to people in the world because there is no such equivalent in their languages. Both the power, the authorities, and the population have spoken this language, which expresses the essence of Russian life for 1,000 years. The language of Russian literature is a foreign patch on the body of this mud language. The language of the Russian literature appeared in the 18th century when colonists from the West brought otherworldly concepts like liberté, égalité, fraternité. It was noted long ago that the Russian state is like King Midas. Just as everything the ancient king touched turned to gold, so everything the Russian state touches turns to shit and blood. They try to extend their grasp to everything. They want to exploit and misuse Tolstoy, Rachmaninoff, Brodsky. They arrange worship for the dead who, they know, cannot object. And they think that in this instance, the reflected light of the classics falls on them too, on the Putin regime, on their special military operation. I have no doubt Tolstoy would have sent this pseudo-state to and demanded that throughout the country, in the literature room of every school, above the blackboard, they replace his portrait with his words. Patriotism is slavery. Right now, Rachmaninoff would have been giving benefit concerts for wounded Ukrainian children. Joseph Brodsky would have repented for his disgraceful poem on the independence of Ukraine and be raising money for the Ukrainian armed forces with lectures all over the world. But Dostoevsky, I fear, with his orthodox pan-humanism, would have been an anchorman on the patriotic Tsargrad channel. After 24th of February, only isolated individuals went out to protest in Russia. Where are those marvelous, desperate women and men who went out to defend the dignity of their people and their country now? In prison or fled. The people have been silent. The survival strategy for generations has been silence. Western experts in Russia attributed this absence of protests to fear. Then mobilization was announced, and the world was bewildered to see hundreds of thousands of Russians obediently going to war to kill Ukrainians and to be killed. This no longer has anything to do with a survival strategy. It's deeper and more terrible. Do Russians want war? It's the title of the famous song in my childhood. Ask the mothers, ask the soldiers who lie under the birch tree, do Russians want war? Ask now the draftees rebelling over the ammunition shortage. We don't have enough shells to fuck the hell out of the shitty Ukrainians with. Russia's population is infected with a tribal consciousness, a childhood illness of humanity that is cured by enlightenment. In modern civilization, the tribe has been replaced by the individual, who stands at the base of the society. I myself bear responsibility for the main decision in life, what is good and what is evil. And if my country, my people, are doing evil, that means I will be against my country and against my people. The tribal consciousness lacks the very concept of individual responsibility for the choice between good and evil. Mother Russia calls. Every Russian regime, from autocracy, orthodoxy, and nationality, to glory to the CPSU and Crimea is ours, has always tried to enforce the consciousness of being a tribe surrounded by enemies. Our national political life has only two seasons: order, stability, and smuta, turmoil. Generations of popular wisdom say that if there is stability, that means he's the real Tsar. If there is turmoil, he's not. People don't choose the victor. Power is the sole source of Russian legitimacy. He lost the Chechen war, so Boris is disgraceful drunkard. He won, so the real Tsar is in the Kremlin. He annexed Crimea, so we have Putin means we have Russia. He didn't beat the Kiev Nazis, so he's a dwarf in a bunker hidden behind a kilometer-long table. Russia occupies territory where historical time has stopped. The country just can't make its way out of the past and into the present, and changing the calendar didn't help here. The failure to take Kiev, the lack of a victory in the Ukrainian war, that's a sure sign he's not the real Tsar. The country held its breath when Prigozhin's tanks were approaching Moscow. 400 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 200 kilometers from the Kremlin. The Wagner men were greeted with flowers and ice cream in Rostov. Prigozhin had everything he needed to declare himself the new Tsar. Power that no one even tried to resist. He was flesh of their flesh. He had sniffed the smell of prison, the Russian nose knows so well, and the Khanate's native language gushed from him. Most important, he was the only one of Putin's generals with a victory. His troops conquered Bakhmut in his pocket. Russia is ready for a new Tsar, but a new Tsar is not yet ready for Russia. Unfortunately, no one is coming to Moscow in an Abrams. One famous opposition leader promised to come to the Red Square on an US tank. In the historic sense, Germany was lucky that Colonel Stauffenberg did not blow up Hitler. The Nazification was carried out by the occupation powers, not Gestapo men. NATO commandants are not going to be hanging posters of murdered Ukrainian children. This is your fault. This is your town's fault. In remote Russian towns, as the Americans did in post-war Germany. There is no Nuremberg on the Russian map. There won't be any Russian national repentance. The post-Putins are not going to be getting down on their knees in Bucha, Mariupol, Prague, Budapest, Vilnius, Tbilisi. That's not what Tsars do. Accordingly, there will be no Marshall Plan. On the other hand, there will be a handshake with the first Kremlin ruler who promises the West oversight over Russia's rusty nuclear arsenal. After one presidential campaign speech, Navalny was approached by someone who said, "Alexei, I like what you are saying. I like you. But first, become president, and then I will vote for you." To introduce democracy to Russia, you first have to become Tsar. But becoming Tsar means becoming a Tsar. The actor plays the part but cannot change it. For the foreseeable future, the Russian Federation has turned into a radioactive zone for culture. The university presidents, museum and library directors, and theater and film directors who came out openly in support of the special military operation, and almost all of them in the huge country had to sign declarations supporting this war, made themselves into war criminals. But they don't have to worry. There will be no lustration, and they don't believe in punishment on Judgment Day. Naturally, by supporting the war, they saved their museums, libraries, and theaters. Kiss the villain's hand and then spit, the famous quotation from Pushkin's The Captain's Daughter. By betraying himself in order to save his theater, the director will not be able later to fulfill his calling in the theater. You cannot save yourself or your theater through betrayal. Culture is human dignity's form of existence. You can wash off dirt and sweat, but how do you wash off silence? Where is the line between a silence for salvation and meanness? Strontium's half-life is 28 years. Cesium's is 30. What is the half-life of meanness? Putin's war is being waged against Ukraine. And by this war, they destroy Russia. They are destroying culture, they are destroying the country. The people are silent and nod their head on the block as usual and sigh that the Tsar knows best. Only speech can oppose silence. Free speech is itself an act of resistance. In Russia, you can either sing patriotic songs or be silent, or emigrate. Emigration is an act of resistance. But the free Russian speech that opposes the Khanate breathes its air permitted with the exhalations of the slave generations, which we have to exhale from our lungs. We have to free ourselves from the Khanate inside us. Words are a fail-safe system for telling us from them. Words like "na Ukraini" and "Pribaltika", whose very structure denies the independence of Ukraine and the Baltic states. Words like "great Russian literature." We have to hook up empire like verbal flag. Can Russian culture exist outside its own territory? What makes us different from the emigration a century ago is the opportunity to use high tech. I always think how lost, how cut off from the centers of the Russian emigration, Berlin and Paris, some literary circle in Harbin must have felt. But now you are riding on a train in Africa, and if you have Wi-Fi, you are in the center of Russian culture. Maybe this is a chance for a marvelous Russia of the future, a slogan by Alexei Navalny, to appear in which we have Chekhov and Rachmaninov, but no Putin or Prigozhin. That country is located in the virtual world and may not be able to exist offline in principle. My Russia is a country that has declared its independence from the sovereign's boot. My Russia does not require legalization or a passport. My Russia is made legitimate by the breath of the person who lives by Russian culture. The capital of Russian culture is anywhere we, its bearers, consumers, and creators are, all over the world. But how long can a language live in emigration? We have the experience of the post-revolutionary exodus. The children still spoke Russian. The grandchildren didn't. We have our own experience. Our children still speak Russian with us, but will our grandchildren speak Russian? Apparently, we Russians are not able to preserve the Russian language and culture even for a third generation. The Russian immigration doesn't have the foundation that allowed the Jews to preserve themselves over the millennia. The Jews have language and God. Russians have only language. Does that mean Slavists are going to be studying literature in a dead language like Latinists? The population of our historical homeland is always going to produce native speech, like porridge from a magic pot in the famous fairy tale, and no one is going to shout at them to stop making it. The flow of fresh verbal blood from Russia is not going to stop. Brodsky, Sasha Sokolov, Vladimir Sharov originated in the Soviet ditch water. Just as a river finds itself a channel, so language always finds itself a poet. What is Russian culture for? Only a text can restore dignity to Russian literature. A text as atonement. And it has to be written not by an emigre, but by someone who sat in a trench in Ukraine and asked himself, Who am I? What am I doing here? What is this war for? Why are we Russian fascists? Will this text ever be written? God knows. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail. When I hear you, I sense a deep, deep sorrow, but I can also sense a slight ray of hope when you speak about language. Language is a carrier of culture. It can also be a carrier, but unfortunately mustn't, of thought and reflection and give ground for action. After this horrible war, or even already now, both Ukraine and Russia will have to use thought and reflection to process this experience in order to get over it. We'll remember it, but go forward to shape a decent society. I can see that happen in Ukraine, less so in Russia now, but there is also decent, responsible Russia, suppressed but trying to express themselves. There are those brave people in prison. There are those soldiers' wives. There are those now supporting Boris Nadezhdin. There are all those who have voted for the defeat, which you mentioned, and others, signs. There are those who want to break Russia out of that vicious circle of autocratic strongmen and cowards. But much depends, of course, on the ending. Much depends also on us in the affluent West. We have a responsibility to think, reflect, and support. But how? What are our possibilities? How can we reach out? That is my question, which I hope will get some answers today. But now to the other question. Mr. Weber asked, what do you think about the responsibility of Archbishop Kirill and the Orthodox Church for this disaster in Russia?
Yeah. I've got a lot of questions, you see. I've got a lot of questions regarding the role of Russian Orthodox Church in this war from my Western readers, yeah, and listeners, because people in the West, see, they were grown up by Russian writers, by Dostoevsky, where the Russian church is so like enigma, is so important, this Russian soul, yes, something very special. How did this idea of Russian soul come to the West? Through the Russian literature. Can you imagine the Western 19th century, the century of atheism? People didn't believe in God anymore. Yeah? And suddenly, books by Tolstoy, by Dostoevsky came to the West, where people were looking for God. People were looking for religion, and with such strength, yeah, with such power. Oh, that was special Russian soul, yeah. It was not Russian soul, it was Russian literature. And in this church, you will never find this Russian soul looking for God, because the church was in Russia always just the part of the regime, always. The main task of the regime is to make slaves. And the main task of the Russian church was not to look for God, but to make obedient slaves for the regime. So church, the Russian Orthodox Church, is just the school of slavery. And now in the last years, we have seen how it works. Yeah. All these priests they are also war criminals. They are war criminals. And the Russian church is war criminal church. That's all what I could say about the Russian church. Is the school of slaves, unfortunately.
May I add something?
I'm afraid my answers could disappoint. Yeah.
May I add something?
Sure, I'd like to have a dialogue, not just me talking.
Yeah. In the 15th century, sorry, 1650s and so on, the Mogil Academy in Kiev, in independent Ukraine, had connections with the West. They studied Latin and Greek, and also published and discussed in native, what we call Russian or Slavic language. When Ukraine was occupied, may I say, by Russia, this academy made impressions and contributed to the schism inside the Russian church between old believers and new believers. Is that connection with the West altogether gone? Or has it had a long time impression in Russia?
I would remember, was it the question or?
If the Ukraine with the more Western direction, language, and theological thoughts in Ukraine made an impression in Russia.
Yes, sure. You're absolutely right. But we should then remember not the 17th century, but the 10th, the 9th, the 11th century. Yeah. The famous, actually, the first Russian philosopher, Pyotr Chadaev, wrote in his philosophical letter, for him, the reason what happened, what was wrong with Russian history was the very beginning of the church in Russia, because they chose to be part of the Byzantine church, of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and not of the Western Latin Church. And so they just, cut off from the development of the Western civilization. And that was actually already the gap between Russia and the Western Europe in this choosing the false religion. Yeah. And so in this way, it was impossible to participate in the development of the science of enlightenment, of the progress, because the language, for example, the lingua franca for the whole world in the medievals was Latin, the language of the Latin Church, and not Slavonian, not old Slavonic language, So that was the start of the problems, not the 16th century. 16th century, it was everything too late.
But Chadaev was also a part of the so-called Zapadniki, the Western-influenced authors. Is that strain died out, or is it still part of Russian culture, the Zapadniki?
Could you say a little bit louder? It's difficult to understand.
Okay. Chadaev was a part of the Zapadniki, a group of thinkers.
Yes.
And this is also a part of Russian culture. Is it still a known part of Russian culture, would you say?
What is Russian culture? You see, now we have to make new definition for all the words. What we understand under the words Russia, Russians, Russian culture. Well, what do we mean? Yeah, if you mean it is the part of Russian culture, when did the Russian culture start? So we have to understand that it was for centuries, the part of the Golden Horde. We are now the Golden Horde, just the continuation of the Golden Horde, yeah? And this pyramid of slaves and the Tsar above, yeah? And it was just one ideology, yeah? We are at war with the whole world. And this pyramid doesn't need any culture. This pyramid doesn't need writers, doesn't need philosophers, doesn't need free thinkers. No. The only thing this pyramid needs, it is weapons. But slaves cannot invent anything. So when Russia had to fight the West, it was in the 16th century, they could not win because they didn't had enough military technologies. They didn't have enough cannons, and so Peter the Great, Peter the Great, opened Russia to the West. And people think, oh yeah, he wanted Western civilizations. He wanted to join the Western culture. Not at all. He wanted just to buy cannons, military technologies to fight the West with its own weapons. Yeah. And so he did. But with the technologies, people came. Gastarbeiter in the 18th century. Yeah. And these people came with the ideas of the 18th century to Russia, the ideas of the freedom, of equality, of human rights, enlightenment, the time of enlightenment. And these people didn't want to live in the Golden Horde. They wanted to live like in Switzerland. They wanted to have their own rights. They wanted to have elections. And so after 100 years, at the beginning of the 19th century, there were already this part of Westerners, actually. They were Russians. They were talking Russian, living in Russia, but they had Western ideas in their mind. And they didn't want to have a Tsar, they wanted to have a republic. And so it was the first Russian, would say, revolution, the attempt. It was a 1825 Decemberist uprisal. Yeah. And after that, we had in Russia very special situation. We have actually two nations speaking the same language, sharing the same territory, calling themselves Russians, but mentally, psychologically, they were absolutely different nations. They were at war with each other. We had the civil war the whole 19th century. And so we, my Russia, had the victory then in February 1917. It was our victory. We declared the free republic in Russia. Women became in summer, 1917, such rights which women in Switzerland became just 70 years after that. But it was the freedom, it was the victory for us, for people who realize what democracy is about, what is a law state about. But for millions and millions of uneducated peasants, it was just turmoil, no order, disaster, anarchy, chaos. It's impossible to live in the chaos. And so Russian history just misused the Marxists with their international ideas of communism just to restore the order in Russia. And Stalin, the first thing he did when he established the order, he executed all the communists, all the Marxists, all the internationalists. And he restored the Golden Horde. I was born in this Golden Horde. It was called the Soviet Union. It was living after the same rules. The pyramid of slaves and the Khan above. And we were lucky, you see, we were lucky that we had another possibility in the late of 90s. Not quite, in the late of 80s and the beginning of 90s. It was again the possibility to build the new life in Russia, absolutely new house. What what did people build? When they didn't know how to build a house, they built the same barracks, the same gulag. You see, all the main Russian so-called eternal questions, like what's to be done, who is to blame, что делать, кто виноват, they came all from the Russian literature from the 19th century. But these were main questions for the reading people, for the reading public. 150,000 millions of population of Russia, they couldn't read, they couldn't write. For them, the main Russian questions is, and I'm afraid will be, is the Tsar real or false? Yeah, because if the Tsar is real, we have order. It's possible to live. If the Tsar is not real, we have anarchy, chaos. It's impossible to live. Somebody must come and restore the order for us. And how could we know is the Tsar real or not? Just the victory. I tried to explain this in my essay, yeah? Just victory. A victorious Tsar is a real Tsar. You remember Nikolai II, yeah? He lost the Japanese War. He couldn't win the First World War. He was executed. Nobody just wanted to save his life. Yeah? Stalin could exterminate, could execute, could kill millions of people. But because he had a great victory in the great patriotic war, he is a great hero. He is a real Tsar till now. Now again, people erect monuments to Stalin. Gorbachev, so beloved in the West, he lost the Cold War with the West. He lost the Afghanian War. Yeah. He was not real Tsar. He's despised. People hate him till now. And Yeltsin realized, you see, that he could win the elections, but the elections are nothing in Russia. They don't legitimize anything. The only legitimization is the victory. And so he lost all the popularity because he tried to introduce democracy, but it was not democracy. It was just the freedom to steal everything. And so his generals told him, we need to make a small victorious war. We will take Grozny in 3 hours. Yeltsin started this war, and he lost the first Chechenian war, and he was not a real Tsar anymore, Borka Alkash, yeah? Borka the drunkard. People hated him. So the next Tsar had to legitimize himself with the victory. And you remember how Putin started his Tsardom, yeah? He needed this war, and he let the dwelling houses in Moscow explode. So he started as a war criminal against his own nation, his own people. And then you remember the second war in Chechnya, it was just genocide poor. And so he came to power. He is a real Tsar. But you have to prove that you're a real Tsar all the time. And so you remember the annexation of Crimea. People were happy in Russia. Krym nash, Crimea is ours. We have a real Tsar now. They loved Putin. But it was just this psychological feeling of being happy that we have a real Tsar, because the life was not better, was not really better, yeah? Because all the money which Russia got for the selling the oil products, the gas to the West, yeah, they put it in their own pockets. People didn't get anything from this money. And so generals told him, we need a small victorious war. We will take Kiev in 3 days. And we know what happened. We are in the third year, almost in the third year of this war. If Putin had known what would happen, he would never start this war. He didn't need such a war. He just needed a small victorious war. And where is the victory? Where is the real Tsar? He's not a real Tsar anymore. So Russia is just waiting for the real Tsar. So this is how it works in Russia. It means the next Tsar will have to legitimize himself by the victory. Of course, it will be a huge disaster in the victory against Ukraine, but there will be another possibilities to have small wars in Russia, because the Russian Federation will collapse. And there will be Russian Federation is now as pregnant with new states as the Soviet Union, the late Soviet Union was. And the collapse of the great empire in Russian history, there was always connected with the wars. So there will be possibility for the new Tsar to have small victorious war. I don't give the possibility to ask questions. Sorry.
Okay. I will go on with a fairly long question from Magnus Dunder Forslin, much about the same theme. He writes, thank you very much for a most excellent lecture, profoundly moving and equally eloquently expressed. Thank you. If we disregard the approximately 15% of Russians that embrace liberal values, that is the enlightened Westerners, is there a feasible possibility that these people, brainwashed with Slava mentality for 800 years, would change? And Russia does not want democracy, not rule of law, not independent institutions, not freedom of speech, not a free press. Russians hail their criminals as heroes and role models and feel proxy pride in the illegal riches and privileges of the elite. You can perhaps take serfdom out of Russia, but is it possible to take the serf out of a Russian? The glorification of sacrifice, suffering, subordination, myrenia, and cruelty is the very fabric of Russian soul. Can the Russian people ever transcend the shadow of the Golden Horse you mentioned? If yes, how? And I would like to add to that, that of course Russians are humans. Such changes have appeared in other languages, other countries earlier, before. It must be possible. What is our responsibility from the West? How can we reach out to make that change? Thank you.
Great questions. Of course, it's possible to change people. Of course. You see, wonderful poet from the 19th century, satiric poet, Козьма Прутков. He said the famous words: «Человек подобен колбасе. Чем его начинишь, то он и будет». So, a human being is like a sausage. What you put inside, so it he would be, yeah? Of course, you see, if it's the work of propaganda, but not for 10 days or 10 years, for generations and generations. Every regime tried to strengthen this feeling of the tribal consciousness. Yeah, I tried to talk about in Russian. Yeah, this feeling of patriotism. Every regime misused this wonderful feeling of the love to his or her country. Look, my father. He lost his father in Gulag. So my grandfather, his father died in Gulag. And when the war started, my father, with 18, he went to the Baltic fleet, actually, yeah? He was a sailor at the submarine. So he went to the war to defend his home country. He was defending the regime, not his home country, but the regime who killed his father. After the war, all his life, he was proud with this victory. He identified himself with the victory because Russian population didn't get anything after this victory. Just this feeling, oh, we are great. And he was upset when, for example, Polish workers, yeah, in Solidarność with Peter Valensa, yeah, when they wanted to be free, to be liberated from the Soviets, yeah, he was offended. We liberated Polish people or the whole Eastern Europe from fascism, and they hate us. Why? So many Russian soldiers died there to liberate them from Germans, and they hate us. It was impossible to explain to him that, Father, you just exchanged one fascism through another fascism. You are fascist. For them, it was impossible. No, we are good. This is tribal consciousness. Our tribe is always good. Other tribes are our enemies. They want to kill us. They want to exterminate our culture, our language. So we have to just fight all the time against the whole world. It was impossible to explain to him that you are fascists. And it's so deep that we are good and they are bad. And so, you see, this is, I think, the mistake, is a psychological mistake of the Western people to think that in Russia, the only problem is just the lack of the information. So Russians just have the one source of information, and this is official TV, and they need just alternative source of information with the truth. But all the years, last 20, 30 years, everybody in Russia had the possibility to listen to the independent alternative TV, Rain, телеканал Дождь. They had Echo Moskvы, independent websites, independent radio. Can you imagine you are the father or you are parents of a Russian soldier who died in Ukraine? And the war started not in February 22, the war started after the annexation of Crimea, 2014. And so you have to choose between two kinds of truths. One truth, an oppositional media. Your son is a fascist. Ukrainians wanted to be free. They wanted to build up democratic society. They wanted to be open to the West. And he came as a fascist to kill Ukrainians. And you are the parents of a fascist. Shame on you. Another truth. Your son is a hero. The Americans, they want to destroy us, and so they misuse these Ukrainian Nazis. And the Ukrainian Nazis hate our language, they hate our culture, they hate Russians. They kill our children. They destroy Pushkin monuments. And he wanted to save our children. He wanted to save our culture. He wanted to save Pushkin. He's a real hero. He died for our motherland. And you are parents of a hero. Be proud of him. Which truth would you choose? It's so difficult to see how to make a bridge over this gap. Over this gap of this tribal consciousness, we are always good, to the individual consciousness. If my people make something wrong, I will not make it with my people. I will be against my people. It's the main revolution of the humankind, this step to the personal responsibility for what is happening. And these people over there, they don't have any personal responsibility. They identify themselves with the country, they identify themselves with the population, of course, with the Tsar, yeah? What we do is always good, because we are good. So it's just one answer to one question, but there were a lot of other questions.
Okay.
What can we do here in the West, yeah?
Yes.
It's also very important question. Who has the responsibility for this war? Sure, Putin. Sure, Russians who voted for him. Sure, Russians who support this war, also by keeping silent. But how was it possible that the attempt to build the democratic society in the 90s just failed? It was a total failure. Russians, I remember in the 70s and the end of the Soviet Union, they were ready for democracy because they hated the Brezhnev's, the Soviet regime. It was nothing to eat. It was it was impossible to live, yeah? And they were open to the West. They had no idea what a democracy is. They had no idea what a law state is, how it functions. But they saw American movies. Video made this revolution in Russia. When video came to the Soviet Union, people started to watch American movies. Oh God, they live in this way. Why don't we live in this way? And for them, it was all together. Democracy and American cars, free elections and McDonald's, all included. And so when in the late 80s, the oppositional politics, told them on the mass meetings, 100,000 of people, let's build democratic society. Yeah, people were cheering. Yeah. And then it was in the 90s, it was the possibility for the West, and not only the possibility, but also they had to, they must, to help the new Russian democracy to raise on the feet. How? Not with the laws. Yeah, there were a lot of wonderful laws in the Yeltsin's Russia. Not with the money. Yeah, they were all stolen. It was very easy to help the new Russian democracy at that time. Just to show on its own example how democracy works, what a law state is. Yeah, I worked as an interpreter in Switzerland. So I saw how people from Russia with a lot of dirty money came to the West to open the account. So democracy works a very simple way. You break the law, you go to prison. This is the law state, the principle of law state. Don't break the law. So all all people dealing with this Russian money, they realized this is dirty money. But they were so happy to get so much money from Russia. So everybody was breaking the law, and nothing happened. It was the same thing in London, in America, everywhere in the West. And so Russians realized, this is democracy, this is law state. If you have a lot of money, it doesn't matter where you got the money, there is no law state anymore. And so the establishing of this new criminal dictatorship in the 90s in Russia was possible only with the support of democratic countries in the West. So it was much easier at that time just to stop this criminal empire in Russia. So if Putin would be arrested in the 90s, well, we had more chances that there would be no war now. And that is why the Western democracies also have their responsibility for this war. Because thanks to these democracies, this monster was established in Russia, established his dictatorship. And now the Western countries must do everything to minimize this mistake. And that is why they have to give as much weapon as needed for the victory to Ukraine, to kill the beast. But what we see, you remember 2 years ago, it was such a huge wave of solidarity. Here in Switzerland, I have never seen such a wave of solidarity. And what is now? Where is that wave of solidarity? No. And we see that the Western countries, they don't want Ukraine to win. Because we see they don't give enough weapons to have a victory, to overcome the Russian army. Because they are afraid of this victory. Because they are afraid of the defeat of Russian Federation, because it could lead to the chaos and anarchy in Russian Federation, and it could lead to the losing of control over the nuclear weapons. And this is the horrible situation for the whole world, yeah? If the rest of the nuclear weapon would just then, without control, yeah, be sold to Africa, to any dictator. That is why we have now a very unpleasant situation that the Moscow, of course, the Kremlin cannot win. And so for them, these peace negotiations are very important. So they want just status quo. And the West is interested in status quo. Just Ukraine is not interested in the status quo. And what will happen next? Yeah, now we see in the press Zelensky. He was a great hero 2 years ago. And now he is a bad boy because he doesn't want to negotiate with Putin. I think the following, so now he is under pressure, Zelensky is under soft pressure from the West because they don't give him weapons, they don't give him money, they want him to negotiate. And so I think Zelensky will not negotiate with Putin, and so just following possibilities. Zelensky will go, and the next Ukrainian president will negotiate with Putin. Or Putin will go, and then Zelensky will be able to negotiate with the next Putin. Yeah. Or just two just two possibilities. Yeah. They're just two possibilities. And of course, the West is not interested in the real democratic changes in Russia. You know why? Because democratic changes in this country, in this situation, would mean anarchy, will be collapse. Yeah, the the Russian Empire will collapse, and we will see new states, and we will see new wars. And West is absolutely interested in the order in Russia. It means the next Putin, yeah, will promise the West the control over the nuclear weapons, and there will be handshake. He will be supported by the West, by the Western politicians. And the Russian history will bite its tail again and again. So, and how can normal people in the West help? First of all, they must help Ukrainian people. They must help with everything, yeah, supporting some organizations who help Ukrainian people to survive. They cannot help with weapons. It's clear. Yeah, if politicians if politicians don't want to send money to Ukraine, what can normal people on the street go to the streets to protest? You see, actually, we are in the democratic country, and I know how democracy works, and this is our strength because by dictatorship in Russia, yeah, people, so the president, the power, they don't depend on people. But in democracy, they depend on people because they may want Putin to win, but they want to be re-elected next time or elected next time. That is why they listen to the polls. They listen to what people want, what the majority wants. I will do it just to stay in power, or to get to the power. Look, I will tell you how it worked with me on my example, my experience in Switzerland. You see, you remember Olympic Games. I tried to organize boycott of Olympic Games in Switzerland. I was on newspapers, on TV. I tried to explain to people, look, you want to support a criminal gang who took hostages the whole country, so then you can go and support. Or if you want to support wonderful young people who go on streets to protest against the dictatorship, then you have to boycott this. Who listens to writers? Switzerland, the first and best democracy in the world, they built the Schweizer Hüsli, a Swiss chalet in Sochi. And the president of the first and best European democracy personally in this chalet licked boots to the dictator, yeah? And as a result, after the end of Olympic Games, the Crimea was annexed, yeah? And this war started. Then 4 years passed, 4 years, 2018, 4 years of the war. 10,000s of dead people, wounded people, millions of refugees. So to everybody was clear what was happening. The soccer, the football championship in Russia. The story repeat, yeah. I tried to organize boycott. I'm on TV, I'm on newspapers. Yeah. But here is moral thing, yeah. And here are billion and billion of money, soccer money, football money, and fun. And all nations came to Russia to play football in front of Putin. And for him, it was everything clear. The world supports my war against Ukraine. It was the last point, yeah, of no return. The last point. It was possible with just to prevent this war. But for people, for Putin coming to his championship was a clear support to his war, and the door to the 24th of February 22 was open then in 2018. And so 24th February, it's a horrible day, horrible news, yeah? And the first thing I hear at that day was that the Swiss president will not, so he said, Switzerland will not support the sanctions against Russia because we are neutral. Neutrality is important for us. We will not support these sanctions. I was so furious because for years, I tried to, with my head, yeah, to break this wall. What to do? Try to go on, go ahead, break this wall. And so on the 25th, the next day of February, I was on TV Arena. It was a main political talk show on Swiss television. I said everything I wanted to say. I explained to people. Liebe Schweiz, die Epoche der Neutralität ist vorbei. Also dear Switzerland, the epoch, the time of neutrality is over. Yeah? And I suppose, you see, my words also, as the Russians say, were my 5 kopecks. And the next day, the president of Swiss Federation said, yes, we will support the sanctions against Russia. So it was break through it. It was first time in Swiss history. Yeah, they broke the neutrality. So this is how democracy works. Through the media, you can influence the voters, people, and politicians listen to the voters and do what the voters want. So just asking the questions, what to do, just try to influence your politicians with any means. Go to the street, use the media, do what you can. Every man must do what he or she can. I do what I can. Of course, we are at war, and the war is now everywhere. It's not line front somewhere on TV screen. I get threats. I got an email from Germany in Russian. Sjisjkin предатель, смерть предателям. Sjisjkin is a traitor, death to traitors. We are at war. What should I do? Keep silent? What is then the sense of my life? I will not give up. But every must do what he or she is able to do.
Thanks. You are very pessimistic. I hope you're wrong, that we in the West will pull ourselves together and give some substantial help, both to Ukraine and I think Russia will need it as well. The next question is from Gunnar Rickardsson, but I will add a question to it in the same theme. In Russian television, in the evening, there are some stars like Solovyev, Gabayeva, Simonyan. How many in Russian and what part of the Russians do believe them? That's my question. Rickardson's question is, do you see any part of the Russian society where there could arise a real opposition, a crack to occur? How about the young generation? The availability and exchange of information due to internet increased the knowledge of life and truth in other communities than your own. Will Russian youngsters be affected? Will we be able to react, to oppose? That's a question.
Of course, I'm pessimistic. What? How can I be optimistic if I see what is happening in Russia? Yeah. Of course, I want to be optimistic. Actually, I'm optimist, historical. I'm optimist because you see, 100,000 years ago, we all were eating each other. Yeah. And this is the development of humanity. We change, and we can change this rule of the power. Yeah. I'm stronger than you, so you give me your food. Yeah. We changed in the 21st century. I'm stronger than you, you are weaker, so I'll give you, I'll help you to survive. And I think, you see, there are these laws of development of humanity from violence to love. And these laws of development, they are absolutely strong, like the physical laws, like all floods, all rivers flow to the ocean. So I'm sure all nations, one day, I don't know when, one day will come to democratic society, because it's much easier to live in the law state when this great state is defending me. I'm weak, but the great law is defending me against the stronger guys. They cannot take everything from me because they are stronger, because the law state is on my side. Think why oligarchs in Russia for 30 years they didn't want to invest in Russia. They tried to buy anything, football clubs or plants or yachts or houses in the West. Because in the West, you have private property. It's impossible to take you if it's yours. In Russia, today you are oligarch like Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Tomorrow you are in prison, you have nothing. So I think that is the reason why all nations would come to this democratic way of life, to the law state. Just this is the reality. Some nations go direct way to the law state, and some nations go in circles. So Russia makes great circles in the direction of democracy. So we had actually two attempts to introduce democracy in Russia. It was in summer, 1917, but democracy, the attempt of democracy just lasted several months. And then at the beginning of the 90s, we had several years of attempt of building democratic society. And I'm sure there will be a third attempt, or maybe fourth or fifth, maybe not with our generation, maybe the next generation. But I agree, our hope is young generations, young people. And who listens to the propaganda? Of course, the television is for older people. Young people have internet. That is why now they will close internet in Russia. They close everything. Yeah. And you will see, if an opposition leader would say something in Russia, an oppositional source, TV or website, people will not believe him. But if tomorrow on Moscow television, first channel, they would say that Putin is a Japanese spy and Ukrainians are our friends, people would believe it because it's from Moscow, because it's the Tsar. Now our Tsar is Navalny. And so we will listen to him. He's always right. That is unfortunately how it works in Russia. Yeah. If so, people will get the information only from the upper source, only from the Kremlin. And this is how it works. So if they will have absolutely different brainwashing from the not Skabeyeva, yeah, but TV Rain will be on the first channel for 1, 2, 3, 4 months. After a year, you will have another Russia. You will have other people. They will think Ukrainian are our friends. How was it possible to fight them?
Okay, time flies, and I'm afraid we will have to leave and leave the rest of the questions to their own. This gives thought the reason for many deep thoughts, and I hope we will go on and think further. I will end.
A lot of my ideas I tried to explain in my book. So if you read my book, maybe you will find there some answers, yeah, to your questions.
Good, good. Of course there are, but you can still think further. I will end with one comment. You made a comparison with Nazi Germany. If I remember correctly, the famous German writer Thomas Mann was asked when exiled from Nazi Germany if it wasn't hard to have left Germany. And he gave the answer, where I am is Germany. In my mind, you and many other Russians in exile, and many Russians under hard circumstances within Russia, are the true Russia. And let us not forget that. Very, very, very many thanks to you, Michael. Большое спасибо. И не теряй надежды. Thank you.
Tack så mycket. Tack så mycket. Jag pratar lite svenska.
Okay. I'll put it, leave and mail you tomorrow. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye bye. And thank you all. Bye bye.